I'm writing this because I'm scared to close my eyes. Not because of what I might see, but because of what I might forget. It's been 3 days, and I'm already having trouble recalling the specific shade of brown my eyes used to be. I think they were hazel, or maybe just a flat, muddy brown. I don't have a recent photo to check. I deleted them all. I had to. It started last Sunday, March 12th. I was wandering through the Streetowin's flea market, trying to kill time while my girlfriend, Sarah, hunted for vintage denim. It was a miserable afternoon. The sky was a bruised purple, and the air smelled like wet wool and diesel fumes. The kind of damp cold that settles in your joints and refuses to leave. I drifted away from the main thoroughfare, down a narrow aisle of stalls that looked less like legitimate vendors and more like people offloading junk before an eviction. That's where I found it. Booth 404 was barely a booth. It was a folding table covered in a stained velvet cloth, sheltered by a tarp that sagged with rainwater. The vendor sat behind it, huddled in a thick parka, his face obscured by a scarf and the low brim of a beanie. The table was covered in the usual debris: rusted watches, mismatched silverware, stacks of water-damaged National Geographics. But in the center, resting on a small wooden stand, was the mask. It was porcelain. I knew that immediately, by the way. The weak sunlight hit it, a dull, creamy luster that plastic just can't mimic. It wasn't a full face mask. It was cut to end just above the mouth, covering the eyes and nose. Venetian style, maybe? But it lacked the gaudy feathers or gold leaf. It was stark white, with delicate blue veins painted or perhaps fired into the ceramic near the temples. I reached out to touch it. The porcelain was shockingly cold, like ice taken straight from a freezer. "How much?" I asked. The vendor didn't look up. He was fiddling with a tarnished lighter, his fingers trembling. 15, he muttered. His voice sounded wet, like he had a chest full of fluid. $15? I laughed nervously. Even with a chip or two, a piece like this should have been 50, easy. Is it cracked? 15, he repeated, louder this time. He finally looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with red, and they darted past me, scanning the crowd behind my shoulder. Take it. Just take it. I shouldn't have bought it. That's the cliche, isn't it? The protagonist always ignores the red flag. But in the moment, it didn't feel sinister. It felt like a steal. I pulled a 20 from my wallet and held it out. He snatched the bill with a grip that was surprisingly strong, his fingernails dirty and jagged. He didn't offer change. He just shoved the mask toward me, not bothering to wrap it. "Careful," he whispered. "I will," I said, sliding the mask into my backpack, wrapping it in my gym hoodie for padding. "No," he said, and for a second he looked directly at me. The terror in his face was absolute. "Be careful when it fits." I walked away thinking he was just another drug-addled eccentric. I could feel the weight of the mask pressing against my spine through the canvas of my bag. It felt heavier than a thin piece of ceramic should. I got back to my apartment in Queens around 6:15 p.m. Sarah had texted that she was stopping for Thai food on her way over, which gave me about 20 minutes of solitude. I dumped my backpack on the kitchen island and pulled out the hoodie. Unwrapping the mask felt oddly ceremonial. Under the harsh recessed LED lights of my kitchen, the porcelain looked different than it had in the gray gloom of the flea market. It was translucent, almost like bone china held up to a candle. The blue veins painted at the temples seemed to pulse if I stared at them too long, an optical illusion caused by the curvature of the ceramic. I flipped it over. The inside was unglazed, rough to the touch, like fine grit sandpaper. There were no straps, no ribbons, no elastic bands. Just the smooth, molded face. "Okay," I muttered to the empty room. "Let's see how much money I wasted." I walked into the bathroom and stood in front of the sink. I held the mask up to my face, intending to just hover it there to see how ridiculous I looked. I barely brushed the bridge of my nose against it when it moved. It wasn't that it moved on its own, exactly. It was more like a magnet finding its mate. The moment the ceramic made contact with my skin, it snapped into place. There was a sharp, wet sound, thwack like a boot being pulled out of deep mud. The fit was impossible. It was perfect, and I mean mathematically perfect. It pressed against my brow bone, my cheekbones, and the bridge of my nose with 0 gaps. It didn't feel like I was wearing a mask. It felt like the air pressure in the room had suddenly dropped, creating a vacuum seal against the upper half of my face. The cold was instantaneous. It seeped through my pores, numbing the skin. but worse was the silence. The hum of the refrigerator, the traffic outside on 34th Avenue, it all deadened. The only thing I could hear was the rush of my own blood in my ears, amplified, rhythmic, and loud. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. I looked in the mirror. The eye holes were aligned with such precision that I couldn't see the edges of the porcelain in my peripheral vision. It was like my skin had simply turned white and hard. I stared at myself, and a wave of nausea rolled over me. I looked, improved. That was the terrifying part. My jawline looked sharper beneath it. My posture seemed straighter. "All right, that's enough," I said. My voice vibrated weirdly against the inside of the ceramic, sounding tinny and distant. I reached up to grab the edges and pull it off. It didn't budge. Panic, hot and prickly, spiked in my chest. I dug my fingernails under the chin of the mask and pulled harder. My skin stretched. I could feel the connective tissue under my eyes straining. It felt like I was trying to pull off a scab that wasn't ready to bleed yet. "Get off," I grunted, bracing one hand against the sink. I gave a violent yank. With a sickening, wet schlup sound, it detached. I stumbled back, dropping the mask into the sink. It clattered loudly, but didn't break. I gasped, clutching my face. The air in the bathroom suddenly felt abrasive. It stung my cheeks and forehead like I was standing in a sandstorm. I leaned into the mirror. The skin where the mask had sat was angry and red, slightly raised, bearing the texture of the unglazed ceramic. I ran my fingers over my forehead. It felt raw, sensitive, and strangely soft. It felt like I had just peeled off a layer of tape that had been there for years. I didn't sleep well that night. My dreams were feverish and repetitive. Visions of faces sliding off skulls like wet clay, landing with heavy splatters on tiled floors. I woke up at 7:15 a.m. on Monday with a headache that throbbed behind my eyes, a dull pressure that felt suspiciously similar to the vacuum seal of the mask. Sarah had already left for work. Her side of the bed was cold. I sat up, rubbing my face. The skin on my forehead and nose still felt tender, like a mild sunburn, though when I touched it, there was no heat. I avoided looking at the dresser. I had put the mask there before bed, face up. I didn't want to see those empty eye holes staring at the ceiling. I could feel it, though. It had a gravity to it, a heaviness that seemed to warp the air in the bedroom. I stumbled into the bathroom and turned on the shower, letting the room fill with steam until the mirror was entirely fogged over. I needed the humidity to wake me up. After a shower that was too hot and too long, I wrapped a towel around my waist and wiped a circle in the condensation on the glass. That was the first time I really looked at myself since the night before. I froze. I looked. I tired. That was the first thought. Dark circles, pale skin. But as I leaned closer, applying shaving cream to my jaw, a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. Something about the geometry of my face was wrong. I've had this face for 26 years. I know the topography of it. I know the slight bump on the bridge of my nose from a basketball injury in high school. I know the way my left jawline is slightly softer than the right. But looking in the mirror, the bump on my nose seemed diminished, smoothed out. And my chin, it looked sharper, more angular. Not by a lot, maybe 2 millimeters. Just enough to trigger a deep, primal sense of uncanniness. It was like looking at a stranger who happened to be my identical twin. "Get a grip," I whispered. My voice sounded normal today, at least. "You're hungover from stress." I picked up my razor. I'm a creature of habit. I shave the same way every morning. Left cheek, down to the jaw, then the neck. Muscle memory took over. I tilted my head back and brought the blade down my left cheek. I expected the resistance of the blade hitting the turn of my jawbone. My hand made the familiar motion to curve around the bone. But the bone wasn't where it was supposed to be. The razor didn't curve. It dug straight in. A sharp, hot sting sliced through my nerves. I dropped the razor into the sink with a clatter. Blood welled up, instantly bright, red, and alarming. It wasn't a nick. I had carved a deep, horizontal gash into my skin because my hand had followed a map that my face no longer matched. Jesus. I grabbed a wad of toilet paper and pressed it to the cut. The blood soaked through instantly, blooming like a red flower. I stared wild-eyed at my reflection. The cut was deep, but what terrified me was the skin around it. It looked too smooth, too tight. I pulled the tissue away to check the wound. The bleeding was slowing down, but as I dabbed it clean, I noticed something that made the bile rise in my throat. The texture of my skin where I'd cut myself. It didn't have pores. For a patch about the size of a dime around the wound, the skin was perfectly, impossibly smooth, like porcelain. By 6 p.m., the band-aid on my jaw was soaked through with a tiny persistent dot of red. I couldn't focus on work. Every time I touched my face, my fingers recoiled, expecting that smooth, inhuman texture I'd felt that morning. I needed a drink. Not a beer, but something hard enough to burn the anxiety out of my throat. I walked 3 blocks to Wine and Spirits on 31st Street. It was a sterile, narrow shop with flickering fluorescent tubes that buzzed like trapped insects. I grabbed a bottle of Maker's Mark, the weight of the glass comforting in my hand, and marched to the counter. The clerk was a kid I'd seen a dozen times before, maybe 20. Acne scars, always wearing headphones around his neck. He was texting, barely glancing up as I set the bottle down. $34.50, he mumbled. I tapped my card against the reader. It beeped. Approved. I reached for the bag. ID? I paused. Seriously? I come in here twice a week. He finally looked up, his eyes glassy and bored. He stared at me for a beat too long. His brow furrowed slightly. Policy, man. Just let me see it. Sighing, I fished my wallet out of my back pocket. My hands were shaking a subtle tremor that rattled the plastic cards together. I pulled out my New York State driver's license and slapped it on the counter. He picked it up. He looked at the card. Then he looked at me. Then back at the card. The boredom on his face evaporated, replaced by genuine confusion. He tilted the card under the light, checking the hologram. "What's your address?" he asked. His voice was sharper now. Suspicious. 1402. Astoria Boulevard. I recited automatically. Apt 4B. Look, the expiration is 2028. It's me. He lowered the card, sliding it back across the counter slowly, like he wasn't sure he wanted to touch me. You look different, bro. Like, way different. You lose weight or something? Something like that. I snapped, snatching the ID back. I grabbed the bottle and turned to leave, but a cold prickle of dread stopped me at the door. I looked down at the license in my hand. It was issued 2 years ago. I remembered the day I took the photo at the DMV. It was hot, the AC was broken, and I was sweating in a gray polo shirt. I looked at the face in the plastic square. I knew, logically, that it was me. It had my name next to it. David Miller. But the face staring back was alien. The nose was too bulbous. The chin was too weak, retreating into the neck. The eyes were uneven. It didn't look like me. It looked like a clumsy drawing of a human being. My breath hitched in my chest. A wave of dizziness hit me so hard I had to grab the doorframe to stay upright. The scary part wasn't that the photo looked wrong. The scary part was that the photo looked ugly, grotesque even. And deep down, in a part of my brain I tried to drown with whiskey, I felt a sickening sense of superiority. "That weak chin thing isn't me," a voice whispered. "Not anymore." I shoved the ID into my pocket, feeling like I was carrying a picture of a dead man, and pushed out into the cold night air. The bottle of bourbon clinked against my hip, heavy and real, but I felt like I was floating. I sat on the edge of my couch, the open bottle of Maker's Mark sitting on the coffee table, untouched. The apartment was dark, save for the blue light emitting from my iPhone screen. It was 8:12 p.m. I needed proof. The incident at the liquor store had rattled me so deep, my bones felt like they were vibrating. I needed to see a picture of myself that made sense. I needed to ground myself in reality. I opened the Photos app. My thumb hovered over the Recents album. I had 4,208 photos. I scrolled back to last summer, August 14th, a beach trip to Montauk with Sarah. I remembered that day vividly, the smell of salt spray, the gritty texture of sand in the turkey sandwiches, the way the sun felt like a heavy blanket on my shoulders. We had taken a selfie by the lighthouse. I tapped the thumbnail. Sarah looks beautiful. Her smile was radiant, her hair whipped by the wind across her cheek. But the man standing next to her wasn't me. I zoomed in until the face filled the screen. The pixels were sharp. I saw a man with uneven eyes, the left one drooping slightly lower than the right. His nose was crooked, leaning to the west. His skin was patchy and uneven, the pores large and greasy. His lips were thin and cracked. It was a face of chaotic, ugly asymmetry. "Who the hell is that?" I whispered. My breath fogged the screen. I swiped left. Another photo. My birthday dinner at Trattoria L'Incontro. The man blowing out the candles looked pathetic. His jaw was weak, receding into a fleshy neck. His expression was vacant, almost bovine. I swiped faster. Christmas 2023. Halloween 2022. The office party. In every single photo, the me captured in the lens was a stranger. And not just a stranger, a grotesque caricature of a human being. A rough draft. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. This wasn't just bad lighting. This was consistent. The digital record of my life showed a man I did not recognize. A man I felt an instinctive, violent revulsion toward. I ran to the bathroom, clutching the phone. I threw on the light switch. I looked in the mirror. The face in the mirror was better. It was the face I had seen this morning. Smoother, sharper. The jawline was defined. The nose was straight. It was a face of intent and precision. I looked down at the phone. Ugly stranger. I looked up at the mirror. Perfection. A terrible realization washed over me. Cold and numbing. The mask wasn't changing my face. The mask was showing me the truth. Or at least, a new truth. It was rewriting my perception so thoroughly that my actual biological face, the one in the photos, now looked like a deformity. My thumb moved on its own. I selected the Montauk photo. Delete. The birthday dinner. Delete. I couldn't stop. I felt a frantic, buzzing need to scrub this ugly imposter from existence. I highlighted rows and rows of photos, my finger tapping the glass with manic speed. Select. 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 Delete 418 items? I didn't hesitate. I hit the red text. The screen blinked, and the photos vanished. A wave of relief crashed over me, followed immediately by a surge of nausea. I had just erased 5 years of memories because the face in them didn't match the geometry of a piece of porcelain sitting in my bedroom. It started around 10 p.m., barely an hour after I'd purged my phone. It wasn't a normal itch. It didn't feel like a bug bite or dry skin. It felt like something was moving between the layers of my face. I was sitting in the living room, staring at the blank TV screen, when I felt a tickle deep inside my left cheek. I scratched it, digging my nails in, but the sensation was beneath the muscle. It migrated across my nose, then up to my forehead. It felt like a colony of ants was navigating the maze of my facial nerves. Then came the heaviness. My face suddenly felt like it weighed 50 pounds. The skin felt loose, baggy, as if the connective tissue holding it to the skull was dissolving. I had this terrifying, irrational sensation that if I leaned forward, my face would simply slide off the bone and splatter onto the carpet like wet dough. "Stop it," I hissed, tilting my head back to let gravity keep my features in place. My hands were trembling violently. I needed to hold it together. I needed anchor points. I stood up, my knees buckling slightly, and stumbled toward the bedroom. The air in the apartment felt thick, resisting my movements. The hallway seemed to stretch, the door to the bedroom moving further away with every step. When I finally reached the dresser, the mask was exactly where I'd left it. In the dim light from the street lamps outside, the white porcelain seemed to glow with a faint, sickly luminescence. The moment my fingers brushed the cold ceramic, the itching stopped. It was instantaneous. The relief washed over me so hard my knees actually gave out, and I slumped against the dresser. It was like running cool water over a third-degree burn, but holding it wasn't enough. The heaviness in my face was returning. That sickening sensation of gravity pulling my skin loose. My hands moved without my permission. I wasn't deciding to do this. I was being piloted. I lifted the mask. I brought it to my face. Thwack. The sound of the seal forming was louder this time. Wet. Final. The vacuum pressure clamped down, and a wave of pure, unadulterated euphoria exploded in my brain. It was better than sex, better than any drug I'd ever tried. The loose, sliding sensation vanished. My face felt secure, tight, held together. I stood up, the porcelain, cool against my feverish skin. The silence of the mask wrapped around me, that dead, muffled quiet where the world can't reach you. I felt strong. I felt geometric perfection, imposing order on my chaotic, fleshy biology. I walked to the full-length mirror in the corner of the room. I didn't see a man wearing a mask. I saw a statue. a being of pure intent. The blue veins on the temples of the mask seemed to pulse in time with my own heartbeat. Thump thump, thump thump. I stood there for hours, just breathing, feeling the cool ceramic merge with my skin, terrified of the moment I would have to take it off. The first thing I registered was the lack of air. I woke up gasping, my chest heaving against a weight that wasn't there. The room was pitch black, the only light coming from the red digits of the alarm clock, 3:14 a.m. I tried to rub my eyes, but my knuckles hit something hard and cold. The sound of bone striking ceramic echoed inside my skull like a gunshot. Clack. I froze. I was lying in bed, tangled in sweaty sheets, and I was wearing the mask. Panic, sharp and immediate, flooded my system. I remembered taking it off. I specifically remembered the agony of prying it loose before I collapsed into bed around midnight. I remembered placing it on the dresser, facing away from me so I wouldn't have to look at those empty eye holes. So why was it on my face? I sat up, the movement making the room spin. The mask felt heavier now, tighter. The vacuum seal wasn't just on the edges anymore. It felt like the porcelain was suctioning onto every square inch of skin it covered. My breath reflected back into my eyes, hot and smelling of sleep. "Get it off," I croaked. My voice was trapped, muffled. I dug my fingers under the chin. There was no gap. The seam between skin and ceramic had vanished. It felt seamless, like a fingernail growing out of a cuticle. I scrambled out of bed, tripping over my own feet, and crashed into the wall. I needed light. I needed to see. I fumbled for the switch, my breath coming in short, panicked wheezes that sounded like a whistle inside the mask. The light flared on. I ignored the mirror. I didn't want to see what I looked like. I just clawed at the jawline. I hooked my thumbs under the rim near my ears and pulled. Pain exploded across my face. It wasn't the stinging pain of a band-aid being ripped off. It was deep, structural pain. It felt like I was pulling my teeth out by the roots. "Ah!" I screamed, the sound distorting into a metallic shriek. I braced my feet against the floor, leaned forward, and gave one frantic, adrenaline-fueled yank. Squelch. The sound was wet and heavy, like stepping in a deep puddle with a soaked boot. The mask popped off. I stumbled back, dropping the porcelain. It landed on the carpet with a dull thud. I fell to my knees, cupping my face. It was burning. Not hot burning, but cold burning, like frostbite. I was hyperventilating, drool swinging from my mouth, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I stared at the mask lying on the rug. It looked innocent, just a piece of white ceramic. Then I saw the rim. The inside edge, where it had pressed against my cheeks and forehead, wasn't white anymore. It was lined with a thick crimson smear. I reached out with a trembling hand and touched the inside of the mask. My finger came away wet and red. It was fresh blood. My blood. I scrambled to the mirror then, terrified of what I'd see. I expected to see flayed skin, raw muscle, but when I looked, there were no cuts, no abrasions. My skin was intact. It was just thinner. The skin around my eyes and cheekbones looked translucent, like parchment paper held up to a light bulb. I could see the blue veins underneath with terrifying clarity. They were pulsing, dark, and angry. The mask hadn't cut me. It had fed on me. It had been drinking through my pores while I slept. And the worst part? As the burning subsided and the adrenaline faded, a small, treacherous part of my brain whispered that the sleep I'd had while wearing it was the most restful sleep of my entire life. I spent the rest of the day hiding in the darkest corners of my apartment, avoiding reflective surfaces like a vampire. But you can't hide from technology. At 7:45 p.m., my phone lit up the gloom of the living room. It was buzzing violently against the wood of the coffee table, the sound drilling into my headache. Mom, FaceTime. My stomach dropped. If I didn't answer, she'd call Sarah. If she called Sarah, Sarah would come home early, and I couldn't let anyone see me. Not like this. I took a deep breath, or tried to. The air felt thin in my lungs, and grabbed the phone. I tapped the green button, but immediately angled the camera up toward the ceiling fan. David. Her voice was pixelated, bright, and jarringly normal. Why am I looking at your ceiling? Is everything okay? Hey, Mom, I said. Yeah, sorry, just laying down. Migraine. I stopped. The voice that had just come out of my mouth wasn't mine. It wasn't the ugly stranger voice from the liquor store interaction either. It sounded empty, hollow. It lacked the bass, the resonance of vocal cords vibrating against cartilage. It sounded like wind blowing across the top of an empty glass bottle. A flat, airy tone that barely carried across the room. "David?" Her tone shifted instantly, from casual to concerned. "Honey, you sound terrible. You sound distant. Are you sick?" "Just a cold," I rasped, trying to force grit into the sound. It didn't work. The words just slid out, frictionless and smooth. "Throat sore. Let me see you," she commanded. It was that motherly tone that usually brooks no argument. "Can't," I said, staring at the black screen of the TV across the room, terrified to look at the phone in my hand. Lights hurt my eyes. "Don't be silly. Just a quick peek. I want to see if you're pale." I hesitated. The pressure to comply was ingrained. Without thinking, I lowered the phone slightly, just for a second. The camera caught the side of my face in the dim light of the hallway. I looked at the small self-view rectangle in the corner of the screen and nearly dropped the phone. The image was grainy, sure, but it wasn't a connection issue. My face, it was blurring. It looked like someone had taken a wet brush to a watercolor painting before it dried. The sharp lines of my nose, the ones I had admired in the mirror just yesterday, were softening, spreading outward into my cheeks. My mouth wasn't a defined shape anymore. It was a smudge of pink against the pale canvas of my skin. "David?" Mom's voice was sharp now. "What is? Is that a filter? Why does your face look like that?" I saw my reflection blink, but the eyelids didn't snap shut. They seemed to melt together and then pull apart, sticky and slow. "David!" "Bad connection," I whispered. The sound was barely a hiss. I didn't say goodbye. I tapped the red button and threw the phone onto the couch cushion as if it were burning hot. I sat there in the silence, my hands shaking so hard I had to grip my knees to stop them. I touched my face. My fingers expected to feel the structure of bone, the firmness of cartilage. Instead, my touch sank in slightly. My cheek felt like room temperature butter, malleable, unstable. I wasn't just losing my face, I was losing my solidity, and the terrifying realization hit me like a physical blow. The only time I felt solid, the only time I felt defined, was when the porcelain was holding me together. Fear has a way of curdling into rage when you're cornered. By 9 p.m., the terror of my melting face had hardened into a singular, violent objective. I had to kill the thing that was stealing me. I went to the kitchen junk drawer. I dug past the tangled charging cables and takeout menus, until my hand closed around the cold, rubberized grip of my hammer. It was a heavy-duty Stanley framing hammer, 16 ounces of solid steel, enough to shatter a kneecap, let alone a piece of delicate ceramic. I marched back into the bedroom. The apartment felt hostile, the shadows stretching toward me like grasping fingers. The mask was on the dresser where I dropped it. In the gloom, it seemed to have moved. I was sure I had left it face down, ashamed to look at it. Now, it was face up. The hollow eyes were fixed on the doorway, waiting for me. "You're done," I whispered. My voice was a wet slur, my lips feeling loose and unformed against my teeth. I didn't hesitate. I didn't want to give it time to mesmerize me again. I raised the hammer high above my head, gripping the handle with both hands until my knuckles turned white. I brought it down with everything I had, aiming dead center between the eyes. Crack. The sound wasn't the shattering of pottery. It was wrong. It sounded like a gunshot underwater, a dull, suppressed thud followed immediately by a high-pitched, vibrating shriek. E-e-e-e-e. The noise pierced the room, a needle-thin frequency that felt like it was drilling directly into my molars. It sounded like air escaping a high-pressure valve, but wet, like a tea kettle screaming through a throat full of blood. I dropped the hammer, clapping my hands over my ears. "Stop! Stop it!" The screaming faded into a low, hissing wheeze. I looked at the mask. I had hit it hard enough to pulverize a cinder block, but it wasn't shattered. There was a single, jagged fissure running from the forehead down to the left cheekbone. It was a deep, ugly crack. But as I watched, struggling to catch my breath, the porcelain began to move. The edges of the crack didn't just sit there, they pulsed. A thick white substance, like liquid calcium or wet bone, oozed up from the fissure. It bubbled silently, knitting the two sides together. I watched in horror as the ceramic healed itself. The crack shrank, becoming a line, then a scratch, then nothing. Within 10 seconds, the surface was pristine again. Smooth, perfect, indestructible. Then the pain hit me. It started as a sharp sting on my forehead, exactly where the mask had cracked. It flashed down through my left eye and into my cheekbone. It felt like someone had drawn a line of fire across my face with a soldering iron. I stumbled to the mirror, my legs feeling like water. There was no blood, but there was a line. A red, angry welt ran from my hairline to my cheek, tracing the exact path of the damage I had inflicted on the mask. I touched the welt. It burned. I looked back at the dresser. The mask gleamed in the darkness, smug and whole. The realization hit me with the force of the hammer blow I had just delivered. It wasn't just feeding on me. It was anchored to me. I couldn't break it, because if I broke it, I would split my own skull in half. I don't know when I fell asleep. I don't think I did. I think I just ceased to exist for a few hours. Sitting on the cold tiles of the bathroom floor, my back pressed against the tub. It was 5:48 a.m. when the first gray light of dawn filtered through the frosted privacy glass. The apartment was dead silent. No traffic, no wind, just the wet, laboring sound of my own breathing. Hoo-hoo, hoo-hoo. It sounded wrong. It sounded like air being forced through a coffee stirrer. I pushed myself up, my muscles stiff and aching. The hammer lay on the floor where I dropped it, a useless relic of a fight I had lost before it began. I grabbed the edge of the sink to pull myself up. My hands felt numb, distant, as if I were wearing thick gloves. I looked in the mirror. My brain refused to process the image at first. It just stuttered, rebooting, trying to find a pattern that wasn't there. I blinked, and the reflection didn't blink back. It couldn't. There were no eyelids. My face was gone. It wasn't a skull. It wasn't gore. It was a terrifying, beige smoothness. Where my nose used to be, there was just a gentle slope of flesh, punctured by two tiny pinprick holes that whistled as I breathed. Where my mouth should have been, there was a faint horizontal indentation, like a scar that had healed over completely. My eyes were sunken beneath a layer of translucent skin, moving frantically behind the veil like trapped insects. I raised a hand to touch it. I expected to scream, but I had no mouth to scream with. The texture was repulsive. It felt like warm, damp latex. There was no resistance of cartilage, no hardness of bone. I pressed my thumb into where my cheekbone should be, and the flesh just dented and stayed there, slow to rebound, like memory foam. I was a blank slate, an unfinished mannequin. The sound behind me made me spin around or try to. The movement was clumsy, my equilibrium shot. The mask was sitting on the toilet tank. I hadn't put it there. It had moved, and it had changed. The pristine white porcelain was no longer white. It had taken on a pigment, a fleshy, pinkish hue. And the texture, it wasn't smooth ceramic anymore. I leaned closer, my breath wheezing through my tiny nostril holes. The mask had pores. It had the slight, uneven texture of human skin. I saw the tiny bump on the bridge of the nose, my bump. I saw the faint scatter of freckles across the left cheek, my freckles. The blue veins that had been painted on the temples were now real veins, throbbing with a sluggish, stolen rhythm. And the mouth. The mask didn't have a mouth before. It had ended above the lip. But now, the ceramic seemed to have elongated, growing a chin, growing lips, and it was smiling. It was a cruel, thin curl of a lip that I recognized from my own high school graduation photos. It was wearing my face. It wasn't just a copy. It had siphoned the data of who I was, leaving me as nothing but a biological hard drive that had been wiped clean. I stared at it, and for the first time in hours, I felt an emotion that wasn't fear. It was envy. It looked so complete, so real. I looked back at the mirror at the egg-shelled monstrosity I had become, and I realized the horrific truth. I wasn't the driver anymore. I was the vehicle, and the driver was waiting to get behind the wheel. I knew I had to get out, even without a mouth to scream, even with my vision obscured by the translucent layer of skin that had grown over my eyes. The instinct to survive kicked in. I was a cornered animal. I scrambled out of the bathroom, my hands feeling along the wall for guidance. My equilibrium was gone. Without the weight of a face to orient my head, I felt like a helium balloon untethered, bobbing aimlessly. I crashed into the hallway table, knocking over a vase, but I didn't stop. I reached the front door. My fingers, numb and clumsy, fumbled for the deadbolt. I knew the mechanics of a lock. I knew the motion. But when I turned the latch and cracked the door open, the world attacked me. It wasn't a monster. It was the air itself. The air from the hallway hit my featureless face like acid. It burned the smooth, raw flesh where my eyes used to be. The noise of the elevator down the hall roared like a jet engine, vibrating through my skull so violently my knees buckled. I tried to step across the threshold. I physically couldn't. It was like walking into a solid wall of glass. My body refused to move. My legs seized up, muscles locking hard as stone. I was incompatible with reality. I was a ghost trying to walk through a physical door. I didn't have enough definition to exist out there. I collapsed on the entryway mat, wheezing through the pinholes in my face. The suffocation was setting in. The skin was tightening, growing thicker, sealing up the tiny airways I had left. I was drowning on dry land. Dark spots danced in my clouded vision. Then, I felt the pull. It was a magnetic tug originating from the bathroom. It hooked into my navel, into the base of my spine. It was calling me, come back. I didn't want to go. I wanted to die right there on the rug, rather than touch that thing again. But my body betrayed me. My limbs began to move, dragging me backward. I crawled, a pathetic, smooth-faced slug, inching back toward the bathroom light. When I reached the toilet, the mask was waiting. It looked radiant. It looked alive. The skin texture on the ceramic was flushed with color, warm and inviting. It was more David than I had ever been. I reached up. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from weakness. I was fading. I could feel my heartbeat slowing down, becoming thready and quiet. I lifted the mask. It was warm to the touch now. It felt like holding a living face in my hands. I brought it to my head. Schluck. The sound was different this time. It wasn't the sound of a vacuum seal. It was the sound of wet meat sliding into a casing. The moment it connected, the lights turned on. My vision cleared instantly, sharp, high definition, better than 20/20. The suffocation vanished, replaced by a deep, greedy lungful of air. The weakness in my limbs evaporated, replaced by a surge of hydraulic power, but something was wrong. I tried to move my hand to touch the face. My hand moved, but I didn't tell it to. I tried to look down. My eyes remained fixed on the mirror. In the reflection, I saw the face. My face. It was handsome, perfect, smiling. A smile I didn't feel. I wasn't looking out of the eye holes anymore. I was the thing behind them. I was the battery. I was the meat puppet keeping the porcelain warm. The reflection winked at me. I didn't wink. The mask spoke, using my voice, not the hollow wind sound, but my rich, baritone voice. Finally, it said. I tried to scream, but the mouth didn't open. The mask decided when we spoke. The mask decided when we moved. I was trapped in the backseat of my own body, watching through the windshield as something else drove the car. It has been 19 days since the swap. I am writing this, but I am not typing it. My fingers are flying across the keyboard with a rhythm and speed I never possessed. I am watching the words appear on the screen like a spectator in a movie theater, screaming at the protagonist to turn around, but the protagonist can't hear me. I am trapped behind the eyes. It's comfortable in here, in a sickening way. It's warm. It's quiet. The anxiety that used to plague me, the social awkwardness, the fear of failure is gone. The pilot doesn't feel anxiety. It feels only purpose. My life has improved. That is the hardest part to stomach. We got a promotion last Tuesday. The pilot walked into my boss's office, sat down, and negotiated a 20% raise with a charisma I couldn't have mustered in 1,000 lifetimes. My boss, who usually looks at me with pity, looked at me with respect. He shook my hand. He didn't notice the grip was too strong. He didn't notice the skin was too perfect. And Sarah, God, Sarah. She says I've changed. She says I'm more present. She loves the way I look at her now. She doesn't know that the eyes staring lovingly at her over dinner are actually scanning her facial structure, calculating geometry, analyzing her pores. She touches my cheek, runs her fingers over the jawline that isn't bone anymore, and she smiles. She sleeps next to a monster, and she has never been happier. I realized yesterday what is happening. I am fading. My memories are becoming static. I struggle to remember my childhood phone number. I can't recall the smell of my grandmother's house. The pilot is overriding me. It is using my neural pathways to store its own data. I am being reformatted. But it allows me this one small mercy. It allows me to write this post. It wants me to write this. Why? Because it's done with this shell. This morning, while shaving, as a pantomime, since hair doesn't grow through the porcelain, I saw a crack, a tiny hairline fracture on the forehead. Not on the skin, but under it. The vessel is full. It has consumed everything David Miller was. It has processed me, digitized me, and stored me in the lattice of the ceramic. It is ready to shed. Soon, this body will die. It will be discarded like a husk. And the face will fall off. It will harden. It will turn white and cold. It will end up on a table at a flea market, waiting for the next insecure, lonely idiot to pick it up. And I will be inside it. I won't be David anymore. I will be the hunger. I will be the voice whispering that it fits perfectly. I will be the vacuum seal against your skin. So, this is my warning. If you are browsing a market, maybe in London, maybe in Seattle, maybe in Paris, and you see a vintage white mask, if it looks like it's made of bone china, if it has faint blue veins at the temples, don't touch it. But if you do, if you can't help yourself, you turn it over. Look at the inside rim. If you see the name David scratched into the ceramic in jagged, desperate letters, run. Because I'm tired of being the passenger. Next time, I want to drive.